Hey guys, FilthyRobot here, bringing you another guides, tips, and tricks video, this time talking about the flow of social policies in Civ 5 multiplayer and some tips to optimizing your play using them. A quick disclaimer, this guide is intended for multiplayer Civ 5 on quick speed, often on the Pangea maps, definitely using the No Quitters Steam group rules, so there's maybe some limited applicability to other vastly different game settings. So for example, some of this may be quite useful in single player, but a lot of it may not be, so just be warned. Quickly, I want to talk about the flow of policies in flow of social policies, excuse me, in Civ 5. The way it works is that a lot of the policy trees are restricted by era. So tradition, liberty, honor, and piety have no restrictions. You can open these starting in the ancient era. Patronage and aesthetics cannot be opened until the classical era. And commerce and exploration can't be opened until the medieval era. Rationalism can't be opened until the Renaissance era, and ideologies aren't available until either you've completed 3 factories or you've entered the modern era. And this limits where you can put your social policy points based on the stages of the game you're in. And what it turns out is that between the 4 competing opening social policy trees, only 2 of them are viable in the early game, and those are liberty and tradition. And basically this is because the early game growth, production, free buildings, free workers and settlers, etc. are so much stronger in these 2 policy trees, and also the culture to a large degree, and these 2 policy trees compared to these 2 policy trees, that if you are opening honor or piety first compared to someone who's opening liberty or tradition, you'll be very, very, very far behind by the time the mid-game starts rolling around. Alright. Another quick thing to know about the Civ 5 social policy trees, as I'm sure most of you do, there's a benefit. So there's 6 policies in each tree, the opening policy and the 5 policies in the tree, and you get 7 bonuses. You get the bonus for opening it, you get a bonus for each of the different social policies you assign a point in, and you get a bonus for finishing all of the social policies in any specific tree. And the finisher policies tend to be quite strong, and what this means is it puts a little bit of a priority on finishing a social policy tree, not just opening it and putting a couple points in it. And what this means, especially for tradition and liberty, both of their finisher policies are quite strong, and both of their finisher policies are very time sensitive. So the tradition finisher policy is 15% growth in all cities that player founds, not just the first 4, and a free 4 aqueducts in the first 4 cities that player founds. And finally, they can purchase great engineers with faith starting in the industrial era. That's a very, very strong policy, finishing policy, and it's going to provide a lot of growth to players, and growth is science and production, which is going to make you competitive in techs and competitive in military units. So it's really, really important, and the sooner you get that, the sooner your cities are taking this pretty massive bonus. Liberty also has a fairly strong finishing policy. This is not a free great person. It says a free great person. That's kind of a lie. It's a instant great person that pushes back the counters on your other great people, but nevertheless is available right then. And that's almost always going to be a scientist in multiplayer play. And again, the sooner you get that, the better it is, especially considering in the early game, you're probably only making 8 to 15 science or so, something like that. And by the time you get this scientist, this may be like 33 or 25% more science for your entire empire. So the timing on both of those is fairly important. In other words, you don't want to be opening a couple points in here, a couple points in here, and then coming back to finish liberty or tradition. You really want to finish either of those policies as quickly as possible. There are some builds that use a mix of liberty plus tradition, generally through collective rule into that, and that's fine. It's going to slow down your finishers a little bit, but the goal is to make the opening fast enough that it makes up for that. But not many other social policies really offer that kind of synergy. All right. So the conclusion from that is you're basically going to be opening tradition or liberty early and probably filling out those social policy trees, one or the other, before you start looking to where you're going to put points in elsewhere. Additionally, once you hit Renaissance, you're going to want to put points in rationalism. This is because rationalism as a tree gives you huge amounts of science, and without that science, you are not competitive versus other players who have those science bonuses. And what this means is you're really kind of forced, once you enter the Renaissance, to start putting points into rationalism, or you will be behind quite significantly from other players in terms of science. And once you hit either 3 factories or modern era, pretty much all your points are going to be split between ideology and rationalism. And this is just because the ideology policies on a one-to-one basis tend to be quite a bit stronger than the other policies. And the way the ideology tree is set up, it's not going to show me right here. The way the ideology tree is set up, it's kind of like a pyramid structure where you have to fill in the bottom layers before you can get the top layers, and they get progressively more powerful, hypothetically, the tenets as you go up through the tree. So in other words, not only are the tenets better in the ideology options compared to the other policies, they tend to also lead towards something else that's even stronger from that. And what this means is in the early game, while you're basically locked into tradition or liberty, the late game you're pretty much locked into ideology or rationalism. And how the flow of Civ 5 tends to work in terms of the amount of culture players are generating versus the tech they're generating, there tends to be a little bit of a break in between when you finish tradition or liberty, but before you can open rationalism and before you can open the ideologies. And this tends to be in the vicinity to 1 to 3 social policies. And that's pretty sad because there are hypothetically, you know what, there's 6 per, and there's 6 of these, so there's hypothetically 36 different social policies you could be checking out, but you really only have 3 points to assign between those 36 policies before you get locked into either rationalism or ideology points. So the goal here is to do a quick review of the options of what these trees do, talk a little bit about the opportunity cost, why the finishers and the lower policies in these trees pretty much can never be touched, you know, basically because what we already talked about here, but we'll talk about why the policies aren't strong enough individually to make that true. And then we'll talk a little bit about synergies, like basic strategies that work well with these policy trees, and also watching your opponent's policy trees to get some sense of what type of strategy they might be planning for. All right, so let's quickly work through them. Honor as a policy tree in general is fairly weak. It's fairly weak, but has some early strong ones that are quite important. If you plan on doing a lot of war, honor is really good for you. And honor is really good for you really for 2 policies or maybe even 1 social policy. And the first of those is warrior code. And warrior code is just amazing. The production and trading melee units, that's fine. Really the huge benefit of warrior code, which actually makes this policy a little bit detrimental to the state of the game as a whole, is that it gives you a free general upon completing this and gives you 50% great general production. In other words, you get 50% more experience towards great generals, so you're going to be generating them quicker than other players. And great generals are extremely tie-breaking. They allow you to push into other players' lands very efficiently and take land from the opponent in a way that sets you up to capture their cities and push through very, very fortified lands in ways that you couldn't do otherwise. So if you're going to be doing a lot of war in the game, those two filler policy points in between you're finishing a tradition or liberty and before you get into rationalism are very likely going to go into opening honor and a point into warrior code to get that benefit. If you have another point in between, again, before you get into Renaissance, and if you're going to a lot of early game war, your tech may be slowed down enough, you may get 1 cultural policy, it's going to hurt you in the late game, but if you're looking for another cultural policy after going to war, discipline is also very strong. This makes stacking bonuses are very, very strong on military units, so if you can get 1 military unit that has tons and tons of promotions, that makes them quite good at holding terrain and very difficult for opponents to get rid of. And discipline is just basically a 15% combat strength bonus for melee units, which have another military unit next to them, which is pretty damn good. The rest of the policies in this tree get quite a bit weaker, and the opener is fairly weak for honor as well. The opener is a bonus versus barbarians, culture for killing barbarians equal to the combat strength of the melee combat strength of the unit you've killed, and the notification of where barbarians are spawning on the map, where their camps are spawning. And finally, you get access to the Statue of Zeus, all of which are pretty garbage bonuses. I hear people ask me all the time, Filthy, what about opening honor to farm barbarians to progress my social policy tree, to progress getting policies in other portions of the social policy web here? It's a fairly bad idea. The way social policies work is they go up and up and up in cost the more you have, and it's and basically what it works out to is the honor that you generate, the culture you generate from opening honor doesn't actually pay off the fact that you had to open a policy here. Opening the policy here makes those future policies more expensive than the amount of culture you actually gain from killing barbarians, which means it's fairly pointless to do that. But anyways, if you do go honor, warrior code and discipline are quite good. Military tradition is actually worse than it looks on the surface. So I have let me show you this, guys, because this is kind of amusing for me right now. Ready? Sound effect volume. Ambience volume is already down to 0. And I don't know what this squealing is, but I wish it would shut up. The truffles, I guess. But it's kind of in the way of this. Anyways, military tradition is fairly weak, and it's fairly weak because it doesn't actually give you 50% more experience from combat. A lot of attacks give you 3 experience, or they give you an odd amount of experience, 3 or 5 experience. And the way military tradition works is it truncates So if you get 2 experience from attack, it gives you 3. If you get 3 experience from attack, it should give you 4.5, and instead it gives you 4, which means this is actually more like 33% experience as opposed to 50, somewhere between 33 and 50. And honestly, the way that combat works in multiplayer and simultaneous play means units are dying quick enough that it's very, very hard to stack a ton of promotions just from combat, because units tend to die or need to be instantly healed, one or the other, which means you're not going to get a ton of policies. Military cast is total garbage. Yes, garrison units provide happiness and culture, but garrison units is expensive in terms of upkeep, or expensive in terms of the opportunity cost of having a bunch of military units. If you're at war and you have a bunch of military units, you need those military units near the front. They can't be spread out through your empire. Standing in cities is fairly useless. And professional army is fairly bad too. The gold cost of upgrading units is reduced by 33%. That's not terrible in of itself, but the fact is it's so deep in the honor tree, you're never ever going to get to it. And if you do get to it, you're gimping yourself horribly by doing it. And then constructing barracks, armories, and military academies are 50% faster. The same problem arises, right? You're not going to be able to get this early enough in the game to actually benefit you in producing barracks, military academies, or armories, and if later in the game you want to pick this up, that bonus is fairly inconsequential by the time you actually want to pick it up. The finisher for honor is gold from killing units equal to their combat strength, and also it allows you to purchase great generals with faith. The end of itself isn't terrible. In the early and mid game, the amount of gold is fairly minimal. Units seem to have very little combat strength relative to their gold cost, so you might get 8 gold for a warrior or 16 gold for a pikeman, but that's not very much. But in the late game, it's actually quite a lot. XCOM have 100 combat strength, so killing an XCOM is 100 gold, and if you go a purchasing strategy, this can be very, very strong. But again, you're almost never going to have the social policies to fill out the later policies in honor. So really, when you're thinking about where am I going to put my filler policies, you're really only thinking about the first 1, 2, or 3 points in any particular policy tree, or possibly spread across multiple policy trees. Honor doesn't really allow you to spread across multiples because the opening bonus isn't as good as the later ones, but if you do go to war a lot, Wear Code is really, really strong. Piety is a surprisingly overlooked social policy tree. It's extraordinarily strong, and it has very, very good synergy, whereas Honor has very good synergy with war. Piety has very good synergy with Liberty, regardless of war or not. Alright, you open Piety, what happens is you get 50% off basically building shrines and temples. You get access to building the Great Mosque, and yes, those are the two. Great Mosque in of itself is a fairly weak wonder. It gives you a free mosque in the city you build it in, and also gives you the ability, if you buy missionaries in that city, that they can spread 3 times as opposed to 2. And after the industrial era, if you buy a great profit from that city, that profit can spread 5 times instead of 4. All of these things are not that great as bonuses go, and it also gives you a little bit of faith per turn. That's okay. It's not great, but you're not opening it for that. You're not even opening it for the half-off shrines and temples, although that early production can be nice. You're opening it because it has a decent couple policies early. It has organized religion, which is very, very good, especially for wide empires. It basically doubles your faith production. Not quite. I guess it's like you go from 3 to 5. So it's not quite doubling your faith per turn in cities that have shrines and temples, which is really good for Liberty empires and okay for tall empires. It also allows, if you only remember, you're looking at 3 policy points, basically 2 to 3. So opening Piety, organized religion, and sometimes you may get theocracy, which is quite good. This is holy sites provide +3 gold, and temples have 25% gold income to the city, basically giving you a market in those cities, an additional market. Or if you want to sacrifice 1 point off rationalism, Piety is one of the few policies where I actually sometimes suggest going 4 points, and that's because you could go the opener, organized religion, religious tolerance, and into Reformation belief. And Reformation beliefs are actually strong enough between Jesuit education or glory to God. There are actually 2 Reformation beliefs that are strong enough that you can make up for postponing rationalism, which most other social policy trees can't boast about doing. Finally, if you do somehow find the policies to do this, and I will occasionally finish Piety as a tree and as a whole, because it gives you 2 really, really good bonuses when you finish it. The first is when you finish Piety, you get a free great prophet. This is actually a free great prophet. It doesn't push back the cost of your other great prophets, and it gives you +3 culture on each of your holy sites. And oftentimes, if I am going this tends to be a Liberty strategy. If you're going a very high faith production empire, hoping to use a Reformation belief, one of the ways you do that is that early game you get something like Messiah, or just generate a lot of prophets and plant these prophets. And this would give them, each prophet that you plant gives your empire an additional 3 culture and 3 gold between theocracy plus the finisher belief of Piety. And that actually adds up to quite a lot if you have 5 or 6 of these prophets planted. Which can be very, very game-changing. It's one of the few policy trees that's actually strong to finish it out, although again, you are trading off points in rationalism or your ideology by doing that to finish out piety. Patronage, I'm not actually sure how to say it, it's one or the other, is fairly weak as a policy to put points into, although the opening policy is quite strong. So a lot of times you'll see players put 1 point into this, or you won't see it, because the way it works in policy trees, when you check your opponent's policy trees, it will always tell you 1 less than the number they have. So if they have tradition totally finished, which is actually 6 points, 1 in the opener, and then 1 for each of these 5 policies, it tells you that they have, if they have it finished, it tells you that they have tradition 5. If they've opened piety, but they haven't put any points in anything else, it won't even tell you they have it open. So you always see 1 less policy than they actually have. But anyways, the opener of this gives you a 25% reduction in influence loss per turn with city-states, so your influence with city-states decays slower, which is really good. And it also allows you to build the Forbidden Palace. The Forbidden Palace is also a fairly good wonder. It's a happiness wonder that gives you votes in the World Congress and gives you happiness based on your population, which is also quite strong. So 1 point in patronage is fairly good for the returns it gives you. The rest of the tree is fairly garbage. So philanthropy is okay. It's gold gifts for city-states will give you more influence. That's okay. You probably gift gold a couple times throughout the game. Consulates is totally garbage. Basically, if you have a pledge of protection plus consulates with city-states, you're at 25. It takes 30 influence to become friends with them, so you get no bonus for that in of itself. And if you're having a lot of city-states and you have lower decay and your goal is to create a lot of city-states, you tend not to get any bonus from this, because really what's happening, this is a one-time bonus, right? Once it helps you get up to 20 influence, and after that you need to maintain above 20 influence, so it doesn't do anything for you anyways. So it tends to be fairly bad as a bonus. Scholasticism actually sounds good. It is a science bonus, so you kind of get excited about that, and you're thinking, well, if I'm already prioritizing city-states, it'd be really nice if they gave me some science too. But the problem is it's too many policies in. It's 1, 2, 3 policies in. You can get to that. Sometimes if you have a slow culture, if you have a slow science game and a good culture game, you might get to that before you get into rationalism. But the problem is actually it gives you very, very, very little science. Even if you have 3 to 5 allies or 5 to 6 allies, which is a lot, especially to maintain for any length of time, it tends not to be much science at all, and tends to be fairly inconsequential. It tends to be less than the amount of science you're getting from opening rationalism. Something like maybe like 5 to 8% is what I seem to see it be giving my empire, which is pretty minimal. Cultural diplomacy, you're never going to get this policy because it's too deep in the patronage tree to actually open, and who cares about it anyways. This gives you double resources gifted by city-states. I believe this is strategic resources, although I'm not entirely sure on that. And happiness from gifted luxuries increased by 50%. Okay, those are okay bonuses, but they're fairly weak bonuses compared to some of the other policies. Compare this on a 1-to-1, for example, with secularism, and you're just like, oh my god, this is terrible. And it's very, very deep in the tree. And then the final policy is +2 gold for trade routes with city-states, which again, you kind of look at this and you go, that's not bad. I mean, if I'm trading with city-states, that's not too bad. Compare that to wagon trains, which is +2 gold from all your land trade routes. It doesn't matter if it's to a city-state or another player, and you pay half off on gold on roads and railroads, and you just kind of get a little frustrated with that policy. And the finisher is the city-states will now occasionally gift you great people. So once you finish all the policies in this tree, the city-states will give you, it's per city, so the more cities you have, the more city-states you have that are allies, the more great people you're gifted. The problem is there's a lot of worthless great people in this game and not very many good great people. So there's musicians, writers, artists, prophets, generals, admirals, scientists, engineers, and merchants. Now, there's also there's khans, which are the unique general, and there is the great merchant of Venice, which is a unique merchant. So there's really 11 great people that the city-states gift you. Of those 11 people, what you want scientists, and you want engineers, and maybe prophets. And you don't want the rest, because the rest comparatively are much, much, much worse. So really what you have is you have a 3 out of 11 chance of getting something that you care about. And granted, these great people don't hurt you in any way, so it's not like they're not pushing up your policy timers for your great person counters for other great people. But at the same time, they're not arriving that often, and there's not a lot to do with them. Like getting gifted a great musician or a great admiral or a general during most of the time isn't something that's all that useful. And this is a really huge amount of culture investment to get to that point. And it's based on the number of city-states you're controlling, so you really need to have a lot control over a lot of city-states to make that useful. I really dislike that social policy, that policy finisher. It doesn't do much for me at all. So, all right. again, we're doing a review of these, and we'll talk a little bit about synergy afterwards. Talked a little bit about synergy with Piety already. Aesthetics is another hard one to use. Basically, everything else is just better, so it's really hard to put points in aesthetics and care about it. The early points of Piety or early points in honor, both situational but both quite strong. 1 point in patronage is quite strong, maybe 2 if you really want philanthropy, that's okay too. Aesthetics doesn't seem to have that. The opener is 25% great people production for artists, musicians, and writers, and that's okay. That's not terrible, but it's not great. And it's not as good as, for example, opening patronage or opening commerce or opening piety for its bonuses. And it unlocks a fairly weak, unique, weak social policy wonder. The fizzy here, which is just a really kind of garbage wonder. The only time that wonder is going to help you is if you're doing tourism, and tourism is extraordinarily difficult to do in multiplayer. This tree is honestly pretty much suited. This is a tourism tree in all in all reality here. The only times you're going to see people open this are basically if they're trying a tourism strategy, or very rarely if they're Persia, because there are some synergies with Persia here with the additional production of great artists to force golden ages and 2 free golden ages in the tree itself. That can be okay for Persia, but in general this tree is fairly weak, and it's weak for a couple of reasons. Cultural centers is a discount on monuments, amphitheaters, opera houses, museums, and broadcast towers. You very rarely build museums or broadcast towers. You almost always have your monuments built by the time this policy rolls around, so really this is a benefit towards amphitheaters and opera houses, and you don't build a lot of amphitheaters and opera houses. If you have a wide empire, you're not going to be getting hermitage. You just don't have the production across your empire to do that, the time to waste on that. If you have a tall empire, 50% off of 2 buildings that you're going to be building once is not all that big a deal. Fine arts is also surprisingly bad. It's 50% of your excess happiness is converted into culture. That would be good, except again, it's fairly similar to the honor opener, right? The culture that it costs you to get this policy is almost never going to be paid back by the actual policy itself. And considering the policy is supposed to be a culture generator, it doesn't actually ever pay for itself, which means it's a net loss, right? And the problem with this is that you don't tend to have a lot of happiness. If you have a lot of happiness, you should have been expanding more. If you have a ton of happiness, you either should have been taking land, either city-states, other players, or expanding more, so you can have better science and better production and actually be competitive in the game. Or, so if you're getting bonus from this, you're probably playing the game wrong, and you'll probably have bigger problems than this policy tree. And if you're playing the game right, this policy doesn't tend to give you very much, which is fairly unfortunate. Flourishing in the arts, 33% culture in cities that have built a world wonder, and the empire immediately enters the golden age. In of itself, the policy is okay, but we're starting to get pretty deep in the tree for this. You have to have both of these already finished to get to that, which means this is the 4th point that you can get in aesthetics, which is fairly deep in this. This is now going to be at the cost of rationalism or ideology points. It's okay. You don't tend to have world wonders in more than 1 or 2 of your cities if you're very lucky. Maybe you manage to sneak in some crappy wonder in some other city just for this bonus, but it's not a huge amount of culture from cities. Cultures besides your capital cities don't, or your guild cities don't tend to have a ton of culture, but it's okay, and a free golden age is okay. All the free golden ages, flourishing of the arts, plus the representation golden age, plus all the great artists golden ages, they're never free. They push back your counter for golden ages. So if you look, the first golden age only takes 330 points. You get 1 point per happiness per turn. The next one is like 550 or something, or maybe 500, and they go up with every golden age that you had. So each subsequent golden age costs more golden age points to get to, even if you're in one. So if you're in one and you pop an artist to prolong that golden age, it still ups the counter for the next golden age, which means when you use policies to finish golden age, you get less natural golden ages, less golden ages that are generated from pure happiness, because each subsequent golden age gets more expensive. Artistic genius, again, is very much a tourism policy as opposed to anything else. This is giving you a free artist. I believe that the artist actually counts against your great person counter for future artists, although I'm not 100% sure on that. Most of the free social people do, the free social policy people do rather. But again, it's fairly weak. This is a whole social policy point for an artist. And then finally, the finisher is cultural exchange, where you get 15% increased tourism for shared religion, trade routes, and open borders. And then the finisher is it doubles the theming bonus from your museums and wonders, and allows purchase of writers, artists, and musicians. Yeah, okay, again, this is a tourism-oriented tree. This is pretty weak with players. They're not going to give you open borders, and if you're trying to kill them with tourism, they're not going to allow you to run trade routes to you. They're just going to war you to break the trade routes. So this is going to be a fairly limited bonus. The double theming, of course, is really good, and so is the ability to purchase writers, artists, and musicians with faith. But again, tourism is a very, very difficult strategy to make work in multiplayer. It's almost impossible to make it work. Commerce is actually a fairly strong cultural option for your cultural policies here. Because the opener is fairly good, the opener is a straight up 25% gold in the capital. This is basically an extra gold building. You don't have the market, the bank, and the stock exchange. This is one more modifier. I believe all the modifiers affect monarchy, so it has pretty good synergy with tradition. It gives you it unlocks Big Ben. Big Ben is an important world wonder for gold purchasing strategies, so that has some synergy there. And the next couple policies are fairly good in commerce as well. Mercenary Army is a bit of a letdown. This allows the purchasing of a unique pikeman unit, and the unique pikeman unit can attack. It can move or attack on the turn it's purchased. It pillages for free, so it doesn't cost movement points to pillage, and it gives you double gold if it captures a city. All those things are great, but it is a pikeman, and the problem is that the timing, by the time you're opening commerce and getting 2 points in commerce, you've already filled out tradition or liberty. Pikemen tend to be on their way out, if not irrelevant or obsolete rather, already. So the pikeman timing is not particularly strong, and a lot of times you don't want to be purchasing pikemen. You'd rather have some other policy. But the thing is that 3 points into commerce, 1, 2, 3, you get mercantilism. Mercantilism is quite strong. This is a gold cost reduction in purchasing. So if you're going a purchasing strategy, there's a lot of synergy in commerce, right? You get Big Ben, you get extra gold out of your capital, and then you get 25% off purchasing. So the 25 plus the 15 off Big Ben are already stacking. They stack additively, although there's also a purchasing policy in autocracy, and that doesn't stack additively with that, but it does stack multiplicatively that way, I believe. So basically, it's not quite as good as just stacking additively like these two are, but it's still very good, and you get some synergy of stacking policies that reduce the purchasing of units, so you can actually use gold as a production resource, essentially. And the science from every mint, market, bank, and stock exchange isn't bad either. It just tends not to be quite as consequential to that. Alternative, if you're not going a purchasing strategy and you want to put a couple points in, the 1, 2, or 3 points in commerce, wagon trains is a fairly decent pickup as well. This is 2 gold per land trade route, which is not a ton, but it's a little bit. And then half off roads tends to be very, very good. For overall gold per turn in your empire, especially when the time you get to railroads, or if you're doing war roads, or if you have a lot of roads up for war or something like that. These other policies are a little bit harder to use and actually fairly weak. I had a game recently where I should be up on the YouTube not too long, where I was playing Poland, and I tried a purchasing strategy with Poland, and because Poland has extra cultural policies relative to other civs, it's one of the few civs that can actually play around with these later social policies in these trees, and I actually did finish commerce with the idea of generating great merchants to use with the purchasing strategy with some overall synergy. And entrepreneurship I thought would be really good for that. It receives double gold from great merchant trade missions, but what it boils down to is great merchants don't actually give you all that much gold, which is a little bit sad. That the purchasing policy, even with double the value from great merchants, wasn't that much gold per merchant I was getting, because you're really only going to get 2 to 3 merchants that you can afford. And then protectionism was okay. This is just +2 happiness from every luxury resource you have. That's okay, but not that great. I mean, it's a bunch of happiness, but it's happiness that comes so late that it's not going to be used for expansions. It could be used for conquering, which is still decent happiness. And then the finisher's kind of interesting in commerce. The finisher gives you +1 gold from every trading post in your empire and allows the purchasing of great merchants with faith. Starting in the industrial era, and the goal was, was a purchasing strategy, and was to get total synergy from the commerce tree. So to have gold from half off roads, gold from trade routes, gold from gold discount on purchasing things, building the wonder, extra gold in the capital, and then merchants giving me twice as much gold, and all my trading posts. And I had trading posts on pretty much every single tile in the empire, giving me an extra gold, and to use that to purchase military units. And it had mixed effectiveness, basically because even these later policies, it's hard to not just take more policies in these other trees and have better outcomes. But commerce is one of those social policy trees that's fairly decent if you have a couple points to put in, because the opening policies have a lot of value in them relative to other trees. Exploration is a very situational social policy tree, and really you're only ever going to want to put a couple points in this 1, 2, or 3, but it's fairly decent, the 1, 2, or 3 that you put in this. This is an alternate route for liberty empires in general. It's okay for traditional empires, but it's a bonus per city, which means that it's really going to be better with more cities, the bonus. And really what it is, exploration, opening exploration, 1 point in that is actually a fairly valuable pickup. This makes war with naval units much better. War with naval units is often very much about sight and first move, right? So Both frigates and subs benefit immensely. They do a lot of damage relative to the hit points they have, which means the person who gets to attack first with them is at an advantage, and seeing your opponent when they can't see you allows you to set up to do that most efficiently, and exploration gives you +1 movement and +1 sight on all your military units. If you stack that with something like Great Lighthouse, you have quite a bit of an advantage over someone who doesn't have those. That said, the other policies are a little bit less great for everybody. They're more situational. Maritime infrastructure is +3 production in all coastal cities. Clearly, the more cities you have, the more of a benefit this is, and the smaller the production in the cities, the more of a boost for those cities this production bonus is. So smaller cities benefit disproportionately more than large cities, and multiple cities that benefit more than fewer cities. So again, it has some synergy with Liberty. If you have a Liberty coastal empire, this can be a very, very big production boost. And then naval tradition is okay as well. This is 1 happiness for each harbor, seaport, or lighthouse, and that's okay. That's if you have a lot of those buildings, it's going to be beneficial clearly, as opposed to not having very many. The other policies in this tree are total garbage. Merchant Navy is 1 gold for each harbor, seaport, or lighthouse, and +4 production and 4 culture in the city with East India. East India is a pretty terrible wonder. It gives you bonuses based on trade routes being sent to you, and then has a small amount of gold per turn. Yeah, it's just not worth building in general. It's not worth the production for that. People don't send you trade routes, so it's irrelevant. And the 4 production and 4 culture is pretty minimal for the amount of cultural investment you have to have for this and the time to build the East India Company. Navigation school is terrible. Great admirals are too slow, so the movement bonus for that is fine, but this is a whole social policy for an almost totally worthless great person. The 15% combat bonus is okay, the healing bonus is okay, but they tend not to be where you need them when you're actually having fights, because they're too slow, naval units are too fragile to protect them, and they get left behind and killed very easily. Most of the times what you see great admirals used for are healing. They use almost immediately when they finally get to the destination they're trying to get to, where your navy's actually been for 10 turns fighting. They will be basically used to heal the naval units, because the naval units can't heal away from friendly territories, heal the naval units and continue on with fighting. So the Great Admiral plus the movement bonus is no way near as impactful as the Warrior Code bonus for great generals, because great admirals are just so much worse than great generals in combat. Finally, treasure fleets +4 gold from all your sea trade routes. That's actually a fairly good policy, but it's so late in this tree, and there's so many garbage policies in this tree that it's very unlikely you'll get to that. And then finally, the finisher for exploration allows you to purchase great admirals with faith, but we don't care about great admirals, and it allows you access to hidden antiquity sites, which are basically like buried great writers. So once you send an archaeologist over to them, dig them up, and they give you an instant amount of culture equal to what basically a great writer would give you at that time, and that's a fairly weak benefit too. It's just not going to be worth the cultural investment in that. Alright, so we've gone through the list of these, and what basically you see as an overarching theme for this is most of the later social policies in these trees aren't very good. Like pretty much you draw like a line like that with like a little dip right there, and those policies are all pretty bad, and very similar up here as well. So what you see is that the opener policies are better than the later policies in these trees, because they give you more option, and they're kind of situational which ones you want to do. So in general, you have 2 to 3 filler policies, I call them, in between finishing out tradition or liberty and opening rationalism. And really what it comes down to is the timing. If you're not in medieval era when your first filler policy comes, you can't access exploration or commerce, which is too bad. Commerce in general is a pretty safe bet. You may mess around with piety. Piety is quite good for the faith generation. Faith later on can be used for science, or in some strategies is even more than just science, like the liberty strategies using that. Opening a point in patronage is quite good. The loss of decay with your city-states, or the reduced decay with the city-states, is quite good, and the happiness wonder from that is quite good. Aesthetics tends to be fairly garbage, but 1 point it's kind of okay if you have a strategy that involves a lot of writers, artists, or musicians, which tend to be tourism strategies, but aren't always tourism strategies. Sometimes Persia with Golden Ages has a lot of great artist production for continuing the Golden Ages. That can be okay. Of course, if you're going to war, honor is always a safe bet. Warrior Code is very, very strong in war. It makes it very difficult for your opponent to deal with your great generals if he doesn't have that code, that policy as well. And finally, if you are in the medieval era, you should definitely consider either commerce or exploration. Commerce is amazing. It has a lot of gold gain from any of those policies, and synergizes very, very well if you switch to a gold purchasing strategy. And exploration is quite good for A, naval combat, or B, wide empires that have a lot of navals, a lot of coastal cities. The final thing I wanted to do with this video was just to plant the idea that one of the things you can do with the social policy trees, so when you hit F4 in a game where you have opponents you've met and you've settled, and clearly you've settled your city and you've met your opponents, is it will give you a list of what social policies your opponents are picking. And you can get a lot of information from that. You should be checking that screen fairly regularly as you're playing the game, because what it's going to tell you is what they're doing with their social policies, and you can read from that what their later game strategies are going to be. If you see people opening Liberty, you can assume they're going to be needing to figure out how to get past the Liberty challenges. We've talked about Liberty in my Liberty guide and also my Tradition versus Liberty guide. So there's 2 other guides out there already talking about Liberty, but you can get a sense of the fact that they've picked up open Liberty and what they're going to be doing with that. You have a sense of what their gameplay has to be competitive, and you can think about countering that. If they're going a Tradition game, you can get a sense of that too. You may know that they are going to be slower early, have weaker hammers, that kind of thing. If they've opened Piety, you can get a sense of what they're going to be doing in terms of they might be looking at some sort of religious-oriented strategy. It may be worth fighting their religion more than otherwise. If they've opened Honor, you may be worried about the fact that there's really no reason to enter open Honor unless you're preparing to do a lot of war, so you can prepare for war from that. If they've opened Commerce, you may get the sense that they're probably going a gold purchasing strategy. You may want to do things like cut their gold trade routes, don't accept gold trade routes from them, try to ally city-states near them that they're likely trading with to break their trade routes, things like that. If they're going exploration, you can assume that they either A, are pretty heavily coastal, or B, thinking about coastal warfare, so naval warfare. If they've gone aesthetics, you can generally assume they're going to try some sort of tourism push, and you may want to focus on your culture game a little bit more. And if they've gone patronage, you probably won't see that because it's unlikely they'll put more points in it than they have already. But if they do things like build the Forbidden Palace, or they have a bunch of city-state allies, you can also pay some attention to that and think about trying to counter that as a strategy. So there is some benefit to knowing which cultural policies your opponents have gone, and understanding how those cultural policy trees fit together, so you can get a sense of what their play is going to be like. Anyways, this was a fairly quick guide relative to most of my guides, but this is a fairly succinct topic that we're talking about. It's just we really want to talk about those filler policies in between Tradition, Liberty, and then Rationalism or ideology. So hopefully this has been useful to you guys, and if you like it, follow the channel, go check out my other guides, and hopefully I'll see you in the No Quitters group. See you guys.